always excited. And we're always excited as a foundation to have some discussions around all of this. In recent years, we've had attempts and good work done around shifting our donors or funders are beginning to have some effective and much more meaningful engagement with civil sector organizations. As organizations, we also try to deepen our engagement with the communities we engage and constituencies we also engage. And so there are lots of things happening. Against the backdrop of having some rapid assessment a couple of weeks ago, it was very much prudent for us to have some form of dissemination. And again, given the discussions on what we have found so far, the survey that we did, and then we can arrive on some few things we can move forward as a collective or as CSOs working around shift the power. And so by way of agenda, we will just project the agenda, we'll go through quickly. But whilst I do that again, please, if you just join us, kindly type your name, your institution you are representing, so at least you have a stock of everybody who participated in this webinar and then the institutions you are representing. So I'm going through the agenda. We are using the same time again to introduce ourselves as participants, and then we can start the process. We are hoping that we will keep to our 2 hours, so we'll have very, very, very limited time for meaningful engagement as well. So we will project the agenda and then go through quickly. Once we are done, I'll just introduce the in-house participants here. But we'll take your introduction online as well, and we can start with the next thing in our agenda. So we are now into okay, so we are doing our introductions like I indicated. After the introduction, the next 5 minutes, we will have this whole webinar being open, or we have opening remarks from our executive director, the person of Ibrahim Tanko. And then we'll have some discussions or some presentation on shifting the power, the why and what. And that will be led by head of programs. We'll now get into the meat of the discussions where we'll present the findings of the survey we did a couple of weeks ago. And then we have some lengthy time to have discussions around the presentation. So we make much more room for people to give us their thoughts and perspectives about what the findings are. And then we can collectively agree on what the way forward is. We believe that beyond discussions, we don't want to end the discussions like that. But we need to agree on what we want to take forward. It's much more a practical approach to having conversations of this sort. And then we'll close the meeting, agree on some few next steps, and then we can re-engage again. So that's a very simple agenda. We are hoping that we would have a very fruitful discussion. I see some hands up. I don't know whether it's the issue of not hearing us properly.
Some of them typed in the question box and their chats have been.
So just so we don't have breaks in our submissions, if you have any issue now, kindly type it out so we'll read and see if you can give solutions to what your issues are. So that's clearly the way we are going to go for the next 2 hours. Without wasting time, like I indicated, I would invite the director of Standard Foundation, Ibrahim Tanko, to open up the webinar for us. So my boss, over.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I should say, as part of my introductory remarks, that the webinar is part of Star Ghana's thought leadership work under which we seek to convene conversations and dialogue, not just around the work that we do and the learnings that are arising from those actions, but also that we facilitate conversations around topical issues that guide and support our work as civil society organizations in the development and social change sectors. So I would like to welcome you to our thought leadership webinar on Shift the Power. I think my colleague, Mamaga Eunice Abunyaji, would be talking in detail about the concept of Shift the Power. So I wouldn't want to go into details on that, but it is a concept and an approach that in various ways have been with us for a very long time. It's called Shift the Power now to take account of developments within the context and also how we work. But it's one thing talking about saying shift the power. It's another thing knowing it, mainstreaming that into your work and moving along with your partners and stakeholders, that it is not just one organization implementing shift the power approaches, but that it is a collective that in which way it will be able to help influence development, thinking, and practice. So the research that we've undertaken, which would inform the conversation today, is part of our strategy of finding out first how widely understood or how do we understand shift the power? What are the implications of this understanding for our work? And are there any common strands, common strategies, common recommendations that we can draw from that would enable us move together as one? And so without much ado, I would like to thank you once again. I look forward to the conversations that we'll be having, and hopefully at the end of the day, we'll have some actionable points that all of us can rally around and use to guide our work. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much, Tanko, for the brief remarks. One of the key things I have picked from what Tanko had said is that it is not enough for us to be talking about shifting the power, but I think it's sufficient for us to think beyond that and say that how do we put all the things that we see in practice? I think it's one of the salient things I picked from his remarks. And so as we engage in the next presentation, the thing we're asking ourselves is that beyond the things we would write and say, are they things that we can put in practice, or how do we put them in practice? And so we are walking the talk and not just talking about walking it through. On that note, we'll have a presentation from our head of programs, to take us through the why and what of Shift the Power. While she's having a presentation or doing the presentation, if there are some things you want to take note of, kindly do that. And so when we open up for reflection, you can engage on some key things that she came up with. So Eunice, over.
All right. Thank you, Frank, and good morning to everyone. And so just to start by indicating that the main purpose of this webinar is to have conversation around what STP means to Ghanaian CSOs. And so that is the main focus, but we thought that before we go into that conversation about the key issues emerging from a rapid study we had done to explore the understanding of this concept, not only understanding, but also understanding and practice of this concept within civil society, we should start by, getting all of us on a one page regarding what Shift the Power means, what is it at all, and why should we be talking about it and ensuring or influencing that we move from talking to doing. So I'll be focusing mainly on what it is, but also what it is not, and then why we need to talk about this, we need to do this in our work, and what would be the manifestation of doing such in our work. I will do this quickly. I think the first point, we want to look at what shift the power is. Are you good? It's going. Oh, okay. I thought I would also see the next one. Yes. Great. So I think when Alaji Tanko makes the remarks, he spoke about a number of things. One about STP being not only a concept, but a way of doing things. And it's important to buttress this because in our sector, we can get carried away by nomenclature, you know, new conceptualization or framing. And sometimes the framings may not be new, but they just give a kind of name or meaning to the kind of things we do already, but that's one. So in terms of that thinking, shifting power or shift the power, because there's also a difference between shift the power and shifting the power in terms of where people sit. So we are using shifting the power because we do understand that it's a process, requires time. There are others who say shift the power, which is it is now. We will talk about the movement and the spectrum of actors and the demands on that. But when we talk about shifting power, it must be seen as a practice. You know, it is about how we work, how we do things, particularly when it comes to dealing with partners, when it comes to dealing with communities. And the ways of thinking and working are manifested through the understanding and the uptake of principles of equality, principles of respect, and principles of mutual interest at the center of any partnership, any work within the community. And that is very, very important because in the kind of work we do, there are different actors who play different roles. And it's important to recognize the different roles that the actors play, not only recognizing it, but respecting it and ensuring that in any kind of partnership and any kind of work within the community, the interests of the different stakeholders are taken into account. So for example, in our work, we have people who are funding. And when we look at the development architecture, the donors, there's a kind of bias in terms of decision-making towards the funders, right? Because they are the ones putting the money in. And there's less of recognition of other forms of resources that are needed to do the kind of work that we do. And when we talk about shifting the power and in the context of partnerships, in the context of every effort in the community, we are saying that our ways of thinking and working do recognize, do respect, and put mutual interest at the center of every activity. In terms of the concept, many of you would be familiar with some of the champions of this way of doing work, one of which is the Global Fund for Community Foundation. And one of the expressions of shifting the power, they actually call it shift the power, is new behaviors, new mindsets, and ways of working that acknowledge ways of working that respect that communities are not only beneficiaries, right? So when we use communities, we can look at it in terms of geography, where people are located, but it can also be seen as identity. So it can be an issue that people identify with. So it can be an issue of rights, so people coming together around certain types of rights, women's rights, girls' rights, rights of persons with disability, and all of that. So when we use community, this is then one understanding of it, that when we work with communities, we recognize that they have assets. So what are the assets? They have knowledge about their context, right? So they live in the context, or they live an issue, or they are close to an issue. So their knowledge is an asset. But they also have relationships in those communities that enable work to happen. And when we approach any kind of development intervention, it is that kind of mindset and behaviors that nourish, nurture, or encourage the recognition, the respect, and the full deployment of the assets and power of communities. Shifting the power or shift the power is also a movement, and this is where it links to the points that Alhaji Tanko made earlier about a campaign that is driven by global contextual factors. And one of the factors has been the top-down development paradigm. I think most of us here have been familiar with issues around development blueprints, right? So you have people who sit at a certain part, if they are funders or supporters, they sit at a certain part of the system, and then they develop interventions, and they move the interventions around without recognition of contextual factors, but also recognition that the people who are the audience of any intervention have the solutions, have the understanding, have the capacity to determine and provide, direction to any kind of development. So it is a movement, and that movement is made up of different people. And sometimes we are tempted to think that it is only, organizations in Global South that are part of this movement. But there are different organizations in Global North. When we talk about Global North, we are talking about Western countries. When we talk about Global South, I know there's a whole conversation about the issue of language, that even this division of Global North and Global South is not shifting the power oriented at all, because then it is reinforcing some stereotypes. And so those who work close to the ground, what others would call proximate organizations, and those who are supporting those organizations to move power or to reallocate power or shift power from the down to the top, so that power, the direction of development priorities, the direction for development financing are, driven by the people, the communities themselves, rather than the funders. And so when we talk about shifting the power, these are some of the things that it means. Ultimately, shifting the power should lead to putting decisions and resources in the hands of communities, so that communities can be active in the creation of the kind of society they want to see, right? Okay. What it is not, which is very important to highlight, is that it's not another development jargon or the new buzz, right? So everybody, we feel like it is the fashion of the day, and so we are going into it, or we are talking about it. There's a dimension to that, as I talked about earlier, that if we look at shifting the power as a practice, then you can see that the ways in which we've been working, of course, not all of it we can, describe as empowering, but some parts of it. Many of us do participatory planning. Many of us support movements where the movements decide on what they want to do, and we are facilitators. Some of us are close to the ground. We are community-based organizations and all of that. So there are semblances of shifting the power already in the work we do. But there are also some constraints to that as well. So it is not a new thing, a new buzz without meaning for how we act. So it's more about interrogating our ways of working. As Tanko said earlier, it is always the quickest is to understand the concept, but the most difficult, but the action that actually would lead to transformation is doing it. So it's not just a jargon or a new buzz, but it is how we work with work in partnership, how we work with community. The second thing is that it is not a project. And I think it's important for us, and even for Star Ghana Foundation, we have been discussing that, do not see the work we do around shifting the power as a project. Because if it's a project, then it will end. Projects come and go. But it is a way of doing things, right? How do we build partnerships? Do we build partnerships in a way that supports partners to determine what is important to them, how they want to undertake what is important to them, and how they see our role as facilitators? How do we work with communities that we do not become bogged down with compliance, but we are agile? We can be adaptive quickly to emerging issues and take action. So for ourselves, so there's a lot for us in terms of how we support civil society. But there's also a lot of implications for how we as civil society working in communities engage with communities. How do we work with communities that they do not see our interventions as the SPT, the STP, the participation, the community ownership as just certain things we would do on one project, but not on the other? That it becomes an embedded way of thinking about even designing, thinking about implementing, thinking about how we monitor our work, and thinking about how we report on the work we have done and the successes. So these are some of the things that shifting the power is not. Great. Somebody will ask, why is it important to be talking about shifting the power? Or why have we even in the past done things to share more power with our community. I think the bottom line or the starting point is that we want development intervention to become more effective, right? So how would development intervention become much more effective? I think that's the big question that STP is seeking to answer. That if you want to support a community, or if you want to support a country in the context of Ghana Beyond Aid, permit me to use as an example, you would want to first start by understanding from the perspective of the communities what their challenges are. What are their issues? How have they been addressing those issues? Because remember that your intervention, our intervention would not be the first, because there have been others before us. Even before formal organizations, communities have had ways of addressing their challenges, right? So you want to understand the challenges, the solutions that have been taken in the past, what forms of support communities need, because we don't want interventions to be seen as ours, but communities must see those interventions as theirs. And if they are seeing those interventions as theirs, then they can demonstrate all the commitment and the leadership that are critical for sustainability. So this is what Shift the Power why it is important that if we are working with communities as partners, if we are working with communities as co-investors, co-contributors to intervention, then the development outcomes will be much more effective. We will be able to demonstrate that we met communities, or when we entered as facilitators into communities, they were here, and through their efforts, this is where they are. So that is the starting point, that investment into development would yield greater results if communities are deciding and making plans. So it is the recognition that every relationship is not neutral. There is power, and then the need to shift it. So if we shift power, working more differently with communities, then we can attain that. And also that development resources are not, infinite. So if we can, it will be an efficient use and effective use of the scarce resources. But even more importantly, that Shift the Power is important to correct historical imbalances in terms of social injustice, right? So people or communities that have been rendered, excluded groups, communities that have been rendered disadvantaged by the way development architecture has functioned would now begin would now have agency, because power is shifted and there can be a level playing field for everyone. And when we talk about injustice, we can look at it from different lenses, right? From the perspective of post-colonial practices, but also in the in social interactions across different groups of people. Some factors that have intensified the call for Shift the Power, I think that COVID-19 has taught us a lot of lessons where community ownership, community resilience was brought to the fore when we did not have a lot of the international players around. So it's making people think that if communities can demonstrate this level of resilience, commitment, and leadership over their own challenge, then we need to support communities much more better to be able to do that. Secondly, the emergence of new paradigms, community philanthropy, which conceptually means that communities are taking decisions for themselves. That's the concept of community philanthropy, that when communities are supported, they can lead their own change because already they have the assets, they have the relationship, they have the knowledge and etc. to develop their own, to create the kind of communities they want to see. There are also the rise in movement. So we have the global shift the power movement, and maybe when we come to the discussion point, we can discuss how we move the movement closer to proximate organizations like yours and ours. We also have the Ringo initiative, which is looking at how INGOs who have benefited from the top-down development paradigm can introduce new ways of working with local communities that can lead to transformation. So some of those global contextual factors have pushed, the conversation around shift the power much more strongly in the past years, since 2016, when the first conference was, or the hashtag was introduced. And so this is just to provide a bit of foundation or grounding to the whole concept and the practice of shift the power. And we wanted to, on the basis of the conversations happening globally, begin to, introduce this conversation also within civil society in Ghana. And as Frank said, to see how we can collectively be part of the discourse, how we can pick the insight and integrate in the work that we do. And it is that curiosity as part of our thought leadership work that has led us to undertake a rapid study on the topic, which Frank will just begin to share right now. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much, Eunice. So she made some very insightful submissions. I heard her mention something about mutual interest, and so I'm just placing some key points for reflection. I heard her mention things about new behavior and mindsets, and that in the space of shifting the power has to start with new behaviors and new mindsets as well. I heard her mention appreciation of assets of communities, and so once we move into the communities and work with them, we are not going there as having everything, but also showing an appreciation that these people are already having some assets we can work together with. I heard her mention things about decision and resources in the hands of the community, and that is what we want the Shift the Power movement to get to. So at the end of the day, we have decisions and resources in the hands of the community. And then one other insightful thing again was that STP is not a project. It should be part of the way we do our things. And so if we treated it as a project, if it's a 2-year project, by 2 years we are done with the project. But if it's a way and a culture of doing things in our institution, then it stays with us. And then she ended her submission by asking, why do we even need to shift power? Or why do we really need shifting power? And so all of these are reflections that we are going to engage on after my presentation. And so just be taking notes and put your questions and thoughts together and then we can have a very lengthy engagement on that once I'm done with my presentation. And so at this point, we would go through some few slides I put together when we did the survey or the rapid assessment. We are calling it a rapid assessment because we didn't go through all the methodological things that people would expect in the survey, but of course, a rapid assessment is equally a good way of also gathering data from people. And so, just to lay the foundation that we have done this very rapidly, I guess we'll wait for a second projection so we can have that. Okay. So, by way of the presentation, we would have. By way of the presentation, we would have some objectives for the study, some issues about representation or let's say classification of the respondents that we met, some key findings of the study, and then we would conclude with some hard expectations from the people that we engage. So there are two clear objectives of the. So there are two clear objectives of why we did this study. The first one is for us to explore, like it is indicated, explore the understanding of shifts in power within Ghanaian societies or within Ghanaian civil society organizations. The other objective was for us to project CSOs expectations of the shift in power movement, and that would come from the acts and expectations that we had from civil society organizations. So as we proceed, we will get to know what the acts and expectations are. Okay. So, like I indicated, just to take you through some quick things that we had done prior to the collection. So at least we put the data that we have in context. And so just to indicate that this whole survey was a purposive sampling approach that we adapted. That means that we wanted to have a fair representation of CSOs in different levels of operation and in different regions. And so if we just did a normal approach of random, we might lose on some of the key critical stakeholders that we wanted to be part of the survey. So we're more purposive in terms of who would be part and all of that. And so in doing all of that, we arrived at a total sample size of 200 CSOs, and then we launched on the survey. Somebody would ask why we use a sample size of 200 CSOs. So we had read a report from an MPU indicated that we had about 1,000 or a little over 1,000 CSOs who had registered in their database. And so we felt that we wanted to use like a fit. So usually in research, if you did something 20% beyond, it becomes a little representative we can talk about. We didn't want to do things, and yes, we can't make conclusions out of the work with it. So we had a sample size of 200, but we had 131 CSOs out of the 200 representing 56%, which is the total number responding to our questionnaires. Of course, we had to come with so many challenges and all of that. Just to also indicate that we had used the Google Forms as a principal data collection tool. It was the same tool that we used to extract some summaries because of the rapid nature of it. So we didn't go through the usual rigorous thing that people are familiar with, but just to say that this is also an acceptable mode of doing research depending on how quick or how you want to do it. So we had 10 hours as more like a light touch rapid assessments with it. So just to lay all of this in context, and so we can appreciate the findings thereafter. Okay, so like I indicated, this talks about some distribution of the respondents. So this is just something that, or you have an appreciation of who and who was back. So like I said earlier, we had a total of 131 CSOs who responded to the survey. Out of this 131, we had 76 of them because they had indicated their gender as well. So 76% of them were males who had responded. And let me just quickly add that these respondents were principally project managers, some of them project leads, some of them heads of exchanges and all of that. So you have an idea of who responded to the survey. We were able to get CSO from at least each of the regions. So all the 15 regions that participated in the survey, we had responded coming from all the regions. Of course, there will be differences in terms of the number, but at least we had representation from all the 16 regions. Just to also say that we did some zoning, and so beyond the regions, we did like a southern zone representation, with a northern zone representation, and we did a middle zone representation. So the northern zone is our traditional 5 regions. The southern zone with the particularly from Volta, Greater Accra, Central, Western, and the middle belt, of course, is the Eastern, the Ashanti, and then the Ponkahapu environment. So that's how we did our demarcation, and it was clear that 39% of them were from the southern zone. It could also be that the southern zone had multiples of different forms of CSOs, so maybe that's what contributed for the representation. Clearly, Greater Accra being a specific region that had the most responded. Of course, it could also be that in Greater Accra would have national, would have sub-national, would have local, all of them part of Greater Accra. Maybe that's a reason why we had higher risk representation in Greater Accra. And then we would say that 51% of them were sub-national institutions, and it was part of the deliberate nature of the way we did the distribution. So we have these institutions who are more like a group of persons we are empowering the Shift the Power space to be part of the survey. So there's more like a distribution of the respondents, just to have a fair idea of what happened. And then we asked the question about if you have heard about STP and if you have participated in STP related discussions. Because we wanted to be sure that beyond just hearing, you also actively part in the space and having discussions related to STP. And so 66% of the respondents or the CSOs that responded to the questionnaire said that they have heard about STP. And so that's a greater majority. More than half of them have ever heard the things related to STP. And then we went ahead to ask that if you have heard about STP, have you participated in related discussions? And then we had about 47% of the respondents again saying that they have participated. That clearly tells us that we have more people who have heard about STP, but they have not had opportunity or they have not consciously or deliberately participated in discussions or related discussions to STP. So my question, of course, if you get the two part of the submission, there are a couple of questions that I've asked related to how we can move this forward. Then we really asked a very key question to CSOs and asked them, what does Shift the Power mean to CSOs? And so we wanted to have clearly an idea about how people are thinking Shift the Power means and all of that to them. And there were a couple of options that we had provided, but in our analysis we had mutual accountability and communities taking ownership, having a greater percentage. And let me just be quick in saying this so we don't have a question on that. The percentages are not summing up to 100 because it was a multiple response. And so each person can respond to or can fall any of the 4 areas. And so if you sum up the percentages and they are not up to 100, it doesn't bring any worry or concern because it was a multiple source. One person can go through all the 4 areas. But when we did the summation and the summation, we have 59% of them going for mutual accountability as what STP means to them and then community taking ownership. It's just interesting to have funding local organizations directly having about 43%. That tells us that the thinking is something beyond funding the institutions directly, but how do they take ownership of the processes? And that's what we are driving at. And how do we mutually account? And so if you are implementing the projects, how do you account the people? How the people account to you? So it's interesting to see that we had majority of the respondents coming from that angle. And then we also asked the question about the relevance of Shift the Power. So how relevant it is for us to get into this phase of Shift the Power. And there were 3 key responses we asked respondents to respond to. And at the end of the survey, most of them had indicated, which is about 71% of them had indicated that the relevance of Shift the Power is to achieve sustainable development. Of course, it's a broader goal of what we want to do in the Shift the Power space. about 55% of them, which is still a good number, said that it was the correct historical imbalances. So actually, what making her start mentioned, she mentioned this as one of the things that we had engaged on. And if you want to talk about what's about shift the power, it will lose its relevance. And so these are what we found out for the relevance of the shift the power where we are going. All right, so we are trying to do the next projection. So we want to make sure that whatever we say, people will see back at that. So, okay, so there is a finally once we wait to move to the next.
I on. Who is on? Just do you have the presentation? The way this thing is behaving, it can just go on.
Just hold on for us for like a second. We try to project the slide whilst we talk about the children. So just give us 2 or 3 seconds while we find a way of better engaging on the 5 minutes.
I think Frank, go on. Frank, go on. Just go on.
Okay. So there's one that has funding sources. So we had asked a question about if people were getting their funding externally or people were getting their funding internally. There's an interesting graph which you would see very soon. That talks about, okay, so we've re-engaged again on some other platforms. So just give us another second again so we get to slide it. Sorry, we are in the internet page, so some of these things that are very much.
Frank, just go on.
Okay, so the next one we had was about the sources of funding, and so we had asked people which are the funding sources for CSOs, and there were some few things that came up in terms of like. So some funding sources came up, and about 26% of them had indicated that the internally generated funds for their work, and most of them had said that they are.
Is it not working on the lap? What's wrong?
Okay, so sorry once again. So sorry once again. Okay, so we have one that has to do with the sources of funding, like I indicated. And like I said, most of them had their sources externally. It was only about 26% of them that had indicated that they generated their funds internally. We had about 45%, which was the majority, getting their funding from foundations. And we're just asking ourselves, what is it about foundations that made most of the CSOs align to them and say it's a major source of their external funding? Next. Then we had a question that we asked about what's the relationship between funders and organizations. And so we wanted to have an application about how funders were engaging organizations. And so there were a couple of responses, like I said. We had about 90% of them saying that their relationship with their funders it's purely or highly transactional. Well, about 50% of them say that was mutually beneficial. So if you just want to mention something when she was talking about the things of the power, it said that we can only thrive when we are practicing the power with a mutual beneficial lens. And so 50% of them have attested what you just had mentioned earlier. 60% of them had said that most of their funders had engaged them on short-term commitments. And so the usual projects that would last for a year, 2 years, maybe maximum 3 years. Really, we have projects going beyond that. But we have about 12% of them saying that the commitment was just long-term. If I want to do a flip, it tells me that less of the funders that we work with have long-term commitment, because the one that has to do the short-term commitments were at least very high, but in terms of long-term commitments, it's only few of them that committed long-term with the institutions they work with. But of course, the mutual trust had some significant percentage, about 38%. That's it, that if there's some trust between funded organizations in terms of long-term or short-term commitments, and that discussion will have when we get to the discussion point. And then there was another question again about, so the relationship was in two different angles. So the first one was relationship between the funders and the organization or the CSO. And then this one was asking about relationship between the organizations and the communities. And of course, there was a response about highly transactional, but it was a very small number of people who had said that the relationship between them and the communities were transactional. About 51% or 52%, more than half of them said that the relationship between them and their communities were mutually beneficial. I think it's encouraging to hear that more than half of the institutions that responded had that mutual beneficial relationship with their communities. And same for mutual trust. And so between mutual trust and mutually beneficial, we have more than 90% of them say that their relationship with their communities were mutually beneficial or had some mutual trust between them and then their communities. And then we ended the survey with a couple of questions about acts and expectations. And I want us to critically look at these things, because we are going to engage on them as part of our next set of engagement. So the first one was to provide core funding for local organizations or local NGOs for institutional strengthening. So when we asked them that, what do you expect the funders to do? What do you expect whoever is giving you money to do and all of that? And they said that they needed core funding as one of the things that they would ask the funders to do or provide. And then the next one was that donors should promote the participation of local organizations in their respective network bodies, the development of their financial policies and manuals. What this tells us is that if you are a funder and you are developing policies and manuals, it is good for you to engage the organization in the development of these policies so that you can meet the mutual expectations of you. But if you develop policies and models and came with them, it's already something that we have done. And so if we are shaping the power, how do we engage them in the development of all of these policies and models? So it becomes something that they were part of the process. You can better appreciate the content and how that can be put in practice. And then the third ask or expectation was that they needed to commit to long-term funding for sustainability of the gains. And so this has been repeated in the findings that we had. And then the last one we had was to increase funds and commitment to research by CSOs to the foundations. And that's if you wanted to do what we call shaping the power or shaping the power, there should be some empirical evidence to what we want to do. So what is the definition? So these things that we are doing are all part of the process of having some form of research to inform the next steps to the next direction to take as institutions. And then my last slide. So this is the slide that we are going to engage on. And then what other things that you guys had said, which we want to also engage on, we will also add that. But there are 5 points we have here. And so the first one was that, and we have picked all of these points from the survey findings and just the summary and answer few questions. So there was a finding that talked about more people hearing and relatively lesser people participate in related discussion. There's a big question we are asking, that how do we get people involved in STP related discussion? And so we don't end having people or institutions just hearing them and not participate in discussion. So how do we get them involved? what are the platforms available, what are the forums available. I heard you mention something about movements and said that how do we bring the movements closer to them? Let's share ideas around possible things we can do to make this work for us. Then there was a key point about mutual accountability and community ownership, mainly representing what STP means as compared to funding it directly. And we have a reflection on this implies that the power requires much accountability and ownership to thrive, because people have said that that is what it means. And we're asking a very big question. How do we practice accountability in shape the power? Do we say that because we are shifting power, then there's no accountability or there's less accountability because now we have power in the hands of the people to do whatever they want to do with them? How can they be kept? How do we make sure that we put accountability as part of the processes? And so we would reflect on that more. And then there's one that has to do with the relevance of the power that talks about sustainable development. And we can only do that when we rally around the community priorities. And so we have a bigger question that talks about how do we rally around community priorities? Because they have their priorities. We are not going to tell them what to do. Even before we go to the community, we already have what they want. So how do we work around their priorities and not go and engage them with some set of things that looks or comes across as very new to them? And then we have another point that talks about there is little long-term commitment of funders to CSOs. And then we have a bigger question around that, which says that in which ways do we collaborate to influence funders on long-term commitments? How do we get the funders who are coming on board to say that if you want to do shift the power, it is not about funding us for a year or two. Shift the power will require long-term commitment. So you have to be with us for a very long time. How do we collectively do that? Stagnant can't do that alone. You also can't do that alone. So how do we work together as CSOs to say that we are going to influence the next funding generation? So they have long-term commitments, they cannot work with you. And then I had projected a couple of acts and recommendations that talks about research, that talks about accountability and all of that. How do we engage on this acts and recommendations? So they then become just acts, but they become acts that we can move forward. So these are the 5 key things I have extracted from the survey. You have a reflection. Okay, so these are the things that I picked from the survey with them, and I would want us to engage on that. We won't have good discussions, so it would be as many as we can in the space we've allotted for reflection. We will give people the chance to do. One essence of the reflection is that we want to be picking some salient things around these areas and this person, and then we can have a whole action plan on that. And we had said earlier that we don't want this to become the usual talk shop, but we want to leave this webinar with sets of things that are much more concrete. We would say that moving forward, Stagnant Foundation with the CSOs we have engaged want to move ahead with these things, and it becomes our next steps. We would end the webinar with. Maybe before we start taking reflections, let me just take some in-house reflections, and I'll start with Eunice if she has some key reflections on what I've said so far. Eunice, over.
Yeah, I think that Frank mentioned it earlier, and I wanted to emphasize that why did we do this research, or why did we do this survey in the first place? We did because we came to understand that if you look at the conversation happening on shifting the power, it is involving more of international organizations, national organizations. And when I talk about national organizations, I'm talking about organizations that are mainly in Accra, or the big organizations. And it's not only an issue for Ghana, but also other countries that, you know, are engaging on shifts the power. So it is that curiosity that made us think about how can we bring the voices of civil society, because civil society is so diverse that NGOs are not enough represented. National organizations are not enough representation. And even for Ghana, only few national organizations are involved. And so really the survey was begin to set an agenda that integrates CSOs' voice, and CSOs remain medium-sized community-based organizations, citizen groups, and etc. that are actors in the development space or interacting with communities. We wanted to bring their voices into the STP conversation. Otherwise, the STP conversation becomes another layer of a top-down development paradigm, because then it leaves out a critical mass of civil society in the conversation. So that was the curiosity that made us undertake this survey. Now, many of us are also aware about critical milestones in the global Shift the Power movement. In December, there would be a global gathering of different actors in this conversation in Bogota. And there have been a lot of activities happening towards that. And so our motivation is to bring along the voices of Ghanaian organizations, Ghanaian civil society organizations, to this global platform or summit, where the learning from Shift the Power will be discussed, but even more importantly, a future agenda for the movement and how it engages with development actors. So that's the context to the survey. And we really hope that we would use this webinar to engage on the findings that Frank had shared, and then also the emerging issues. So my understanding is that we will start by, if there are any questions you have at all on what has been presented, you know, the earlier presentation and also the survey, this is the time we want to engage on those questions you would have. But also this emerging issue, we want to tease out, you know, your thoughts around them. So that will be my addition. Thank you, Frank.
All right, so thank you very much, Eunice. Should I assume that we have just been wanting to start, or like that? I see just in bar, in fact, okay, so is there a legacy hand, or it's been up for a long time? Otherwise, the room is open for us to engage. Let's see your hand up if you have a contribution, a question, a way for it to suggest.
People from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Cameroon, DRC.
Wow.
And Cote d'Ivoire.
Wow. All right. So can we say that? So Frank, listen, there are people Franco. Participant, Anglophone participant. We will try and do translation as quickly as possible.
So I'm just highly informed that the people who have joined that with some Francophone countries also participating. I think it's a very good thing. What it means is that we are going global with our work on Shift the Power. So once we ask questions, we can also engage the Francophone people by doing some translation of what questions they want to ask. If it's written in French, and we'll attempt giving responses to them as well. And so we opened the floor for people to ask questions. Let me just see your hand, and then we'll call you to ask your question. Okay. So I see Kamara. I don't know if it's your name, but I see Kamara's hand up. So Kamara, can we take your contribution, reflection, or question on what we have said so far?
Hi, hello, good morning.
Yeah,
my name is Laila Adwan Kamara, working in Ghana at Ghana Small Beach Jumadie. We're just down the road from you. This has been a fantastic presentation. very relevant and interesting issues that you've brought up. Well done. It's very, very timely. I think one of the challenges for me is how do we really do this in a meaningful way? I know that you said it's not another development jargon, it's not just a project, it's a way of doing things, but you know, giving up control from the funders, implementers, and through to everybody in the community, you know, these things are not easy. And I think there's a risk, at least for a time, that there will just be an approach whereby, you know, perhaps communities are being encouraged or coached to still do what the funders want rather than maybe exactly what they want, because you know the funding comes with an anticipation of what work will be done with it, right? But how do we get to the point where it's more demand-led or need-led by the communities? You know, so I think that's really my question. How can this be made really meaningful in a way that sort of upsets those historical imbalances that Eunice was talking about? Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so thank you very much, Tamara. We will take a couple of questions before attempting to respond to all of them. So I see Justin, is your hand still up? Or it's a legacy one. So if your hand is up, can we have your contribution question or any inquiry you want to make? Okay. So whilst we wait for Justin, I see Samuel Alute's hand as well. So Samuel Alute, if you have your contribution and you are ready, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so impressed about this presentation. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, please, we can hear you. Very audible.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful and it's quite clear and very understandable. But there is one question I want to find out. And for every concept or every word that comes or every approach that we undertake, there are advantages and disadvantages. There are challenges in applying these principles. Please, are there any disadvantages or advantages that we can clarify for us to understand so that when we are practicing that approach, we know how to handle them? Thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Samuel. I see Sir David's hand. I think it's David from Youth Rise. So David, if you have your point, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank and Eunice, for such an.
We lost you, David. Maybe you can either reposition yourself or come again. Sir David, David, can you come again? We lost you. Okay, so whilst we wait for David to come again, I have Daniel Alimu. Daniel Alimu, if you are ready, can come in with your question.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
So just introduce yourself and the institution you are coming from, so we take record of your contribution as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
All right, thank you, and thank you so much, Star Ghana Foundation, for the presentation. Just to respond quickly to maybe add my contribution to the last caller asking for disadvantages. I was also thinking about it, but in a different way. What are the risks and the assumptions that will underline the concept? But when it comes to the shifting the power, I was asking myself, we are shifting the power from where to who? or from who to whom? And the question is the top-down approach where public servants or national or district assemblies are holding the power and the citizens are struggling to be involved. So if it is that understanding, then we have to also bring on board especially the district level authorities, because they have constitutional mandate of preparing community action plans, which we can term it community development plan. And then if you are shifting the power, these people have resources to support the implementation of that plan. So are we allowing the citizens to take over without the authorities to give the resources? And how, if they want to even give, how do they give it? It's difficult for them, it will be difficult. So those are some of the assumptions and the risks we have to continuously look at while we are focusing. You will not be surprised. You see a CSO go and say, oh, now we are shifting the power. We want the power to come to the communities. So how would that one work? It should be a very collaborative, symbiotic relationship where the roles and the responsibility of both stakeholders or duty bearers, and then the right holders who are the citizens, will work together to achieve it. It can't be 100% shift the power to CSOs or community people. So these are the things I want us to be reflecting on while we unpack the advantages and the impact shifting the power will bring. Thank you. Over.
Okay, all right, so thank you very much. I think we have 3 heavy questions. And so we would pause and respond to them, then we can take the next set. I have a couple of them also timed out, and so we will just take them in turns. So we'll start with Eunice with some review responses.
Yeah. So I'll start, and thank you very much, Kamara, for those perspectives. And our idea is not for, us here, Star Ghana Foundation, to respond to all the questions or the reflections that would come, that anyone who has some, contribution to the questions, please feel encouraged to come in. But the question you asked about how do we make this meaningful is very critical. And I'm thinking that there are different levels of interaction. So in terms of how do we make it meaningful, it requires, one, a certain level of work with funders. And so when I talk about funders, I'm talking about traditional funders. So either they are institutional philanthropy or they are bilateral. So there'll be some work to do at that level in terms of how do they develop, frameworks, interventions that seek to provide support to different communities or different CSOs. And I think that we have seen in the past interest of some of the funders to begin to question how they develop the analysis of the context, who they do it with, how do they build in a lot of consultations, and how do they, in the end, not show that they have taken information, gone back, sit down, and made decisions by themselves, but make those decisions with the CSOs and their communities. So I think at the level of funders, those may be some of the things we have to do, and that requires intense, global advocacy interactions with the funders. I think that another level, which is civil society, like Star Ghana Foundation, like your organization, about how do we work with these principles. So, for example, if you take Star Ghana Foundation, we support civil society organizations with grants, with technical assistance. And when you ask about how can we make STP meaningful in grants, I can give an example of how we are doing certain things differently. So we know that organizations already working with their communities would develop their own strategic direction, right? So they have made those decisions themselves based on an analysis with their community, choice of change areas and the pathways. And so if we want to fund organizations or support organizations in the true sense of shifting the power, then maybe projectizing or doing project support may not be a shift the power way. But if you enable organizations to choose from their strategic plan, which demonstrates their own decisions already, then it can be a way of making organizations to be the decision makers. I think there's also another level of work, which is, so if you don't take the Sagana example, but organizations that work closely with the communities. Organizations that work closely with the communities. How do we build in community consultation? How do we assign responsibilities to communities? So communities do not see our interventions as ours, but theirs. And that would mean that when that would mean that when we are developing intervention, we are developing it with them, right? So you have to be embedded in the community. It would also mean that we are intentional about creating spaces to engage with communities around the work we are doing, what is changing, what we need from them, and etc. But even more importantly, linking to the question that Frank talked about earlier about the relationship between Shape the Power and funding, that we begin to work with communities to see themselves as more than beneficiaries, that they have a stake, they are co-investing either with their time, with their talent, or with their treasure, so that when they are putting in those resources, the stake will be higher for them. They will be more involved. So those may be some of the manifestations at the different levels. And again, it is not easy. You have to be intentional and deliberate about it. I think that would be the first question, because that was a very potent one. It was big. That's one about the disadvantages and the risk. So we're talking about shifting power. And the understanding is that that's power concentrated in the hands of people who control resources, right? So in this case, a funder. And don't look at a funder with the eye of somebody sitting in London. Sagana Foundation is also a funder in a way. There are other funders, so we need to look within. So even you, if you work with civil society organizations and you provide funding, you are a funder. So that's power concentrated in the hands of funders. If we are asking for shifting the power, it means that people will have to give up some power. What does that mean? If in the past, as a funder, you sat down, created your program, and called a partner to come and implement, you would no longer do that. So it means that your power over decision-making would have to be shared with others. So that people would give up power. But you can also, and the advantage there is that people will gain power. So if there's a community, maybe a group of people located in one place, I don't want to say Southern, local, and all of that. If shift the power will mean that they begin to gain more control over what is important to them and how they engage. So the shift the power, I think, can create a win-win situation for both the funder, the supporter, and also the community, because the funder would want to be associated with effective development outcomes. And if that would happen through making communities to take decisions and etc., then yes, it's a win-win for both sides, right? That's also, so the other disadvantage, and I wish NORSAC was on this call, because they had done a quick analysis around when they were undertaking the Ringo intervention. And one of the things that came out from the interaction they have had with civil society was they may not be ready, right? So we are advocating for civil society communities to take more leadership role. Are they ready? You know, or even the more important question is, how can we make them ready? So if you do not have civil society that can take up the leadership and power is shifted, then there'll be harm done, right? So that can be the risk and all of that. And the whole concept of moving citizens, civil society communities from being only seen as beneficiaries to investors also means that people would have to contribute their resources. Are we ready? What can incentivize communities or CSOs to do that? And those are some of the considerations. And I think that when we create space for conversations like this, and we would, first of all, begin to understand the ways that this can be practicalized and taking those steps. And when we take those steps and we generate enough evidence, then we can demonstrate that this works and this is how it works, I think. I don't know.
Well, I think maybe we want to hear more from.
All right, so thank you very much, Eunice.
The risk and the put it
thanks very much, Eunice, for your submission. There was a question about who are we shifting the power to? And I just would say something interesting. We recently had a meeting with some INGOs on this same shift the power thing. And for the first time, I heard people mention this issue of who are we shifting the power to? And there was a conversation around, are we shifting power? Are we redistributing power? And I just thought it was something that was very critical to hear, that we would believe that we both have assets. And so UNIC's submission had said that the assets in the community also means that they have some form of power. And then maybe the funders, because they have money, also have some of power, some elements of power. So are we redistributing the power and say that we both have something that we can redistribute and work together very well? So there's a conversation that had come up very strong. And I just would say something again quickly before I move on to the next set of questions, that it's indicated earlier that we are shifting power. So what it means is that one, I won't call it advantage, maybe it's a challenge or something, that it will take time for us to get there because it's a process. We won't jump, but it will take time. What it means that if it's a mindset change and all of that, it will take a while for people to have a better appreciation of all of that. So these are content which we can keep on engaging on and everything. Let me quickly read through some few questions we have in here. Then we can move to the online audience for them to also come out with some few things. I see someone asked, how do we have CSOs align to donor priorities, or how do CSOs align donor priorities to that of community needs? Because the donors are coming with their own priorities. If they get to the community, how do we do the alignments regarding the community needs as well? And then there's another one that again is asking about the difference between or the relationship between shift the power and shifting the power. You just mentioned something like that, but I'm sure you can repeat that point again. I get a concern about some francophone countries joining, and that maybe the subsequent webinars we should consider having simultaneous translation, so they don't have to get lost in the discussion. So we'll consider that, and then we'll see how the next one can be. There's another one again that is asking, it is critical that every community project should have shaped the power concept as foundation for ensuring ownership exercise. So this is more like a comment and an addition to what we had said. So I see two critical questions: the relationship between shift the power and shifting the power, and how to align donor priorities to community needs. And then there's another question again, which has just been posted: in what ways can shifting the power empower communities to play a more active role in their own development? And then okay, and then we have a question on whether STP agenda is the same as concept of colonizing aid, decolonizing aid. And so let's take some few thoughts on this before we go.
But I think maybe we should also throw back. Is there anybody in the audience who would also want to contribute to answering this? So we don't seem to be like the experts that are.
So then I think the last one, I will take thoughts from people as well. So like Eunice indicated, we want this thing to be very conversational. So it's not as if it's a question and answer time from Stagnana, but it's a community we are building. So people's ideas and thoughts about these questions would all really be appreciated. So if I have mentioned a question you think I have a very critical submission to make on these questions, please feel free. It's a very safe space for all of us. We can engage and get responses to our questions. And so your raising of hand can be that you want to respond to any of the questions. I think that's fair. Can we have people talk about the questions? All right, so I see Christopher's hand, and I hope he's responding and asking questions as well. So Christopher, over.
Hello.
Hello, yeah, Christopher, over. This way.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, and I like the presentation and this platform. I heard Eunice talking about the asset the community have, and it's a very critical area that we think we have to look at as well. Our communities, they have assets, but unfortunately, little do they know that they have assets. And having the assets will let you have the power to be able to engage policymakers and other people who run around development. The unfortunate situation in our development balance has gotten to do with the government functionaries, the district assemblies, and then the parliamentarians who use their platform to tell people what they would do without records to what the people really can contribute. They take the ownership for themselves. And then when they come out with projects for the communities, they see the projects as, yes, they brought this, they brought that. And all these are leading to unable to monitor and unable to sustain the lifespan of the project. So to some of us, we should find a way of enriching the assets that the people have, so that when they engage the policymakers, they will understand that whatever they are bringing there, it is the people whose assets are being used. And if they are recognized as such, the sustainability content will really be sustainable to everybody. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much, Christopher. It's more of repeating the point we had made. So I heard you mention that we should recognize the asset that people have and then we can have a very effective engagement. So thanks for repeating some of the points. I see. I think Francis do among quite a hand up. When we take Francis' hand up, we'll take some reflection again on the differences between what we think is the difference between shifting the power and shifting the power. But we encourage people to also make contributions as well. So we don't become the default to response institution. So everybody at all can come with that question. So Francis, over. Francis, please go ahead. All right, so whilst we wait for Francis, I have Raphael Ali's hand up as well. So Raphael, if you are ready, please go ahead. Raphael, if you are ready, please go ahead. Francis, if you are ready, please go ahead. Okay, so I have another question again from a name. I'm just mentioning the name as I see here. I see Techno. Techno, I'm not too sure who that person is, but Techno, if you are ready with your question, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please, Techno, please go ahead. Mention your name.
Yeah.
Don't call it Techno.
Yes, I'm Abdul Razak Issa from the Fountain of Blessings for Nations, from a local NGO based in Tamale. Yes, with regards to the shift of power, my understanding of it has to do with the fact that it has to do with the building the institutional capacities of local NGOs that are trying to grow.
We're losing you or we've lost you. Can you position yourself again? All right, so go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. So
hello.
We lost you at
yeah.
a point.
So, yes. So I'm saying that my understanding of the shift the power has to do with the building of the institutional capacities of local NGOs to take up the mantle of the bigger frontline NGOs. And then it also has to do with helping the local communities and duty bearers to become resilient in effectively participating and promoting development initiatives that seeks to bring about a sustainable change in our communities. So basically, this is just my understanding of what the shift the power is all about.
All right, so thank you. Do we have Raphael on? Raphael, are you ready with your question? Okay, so I see I have some issue. Please, if you are ready, I have some issue. Please go ahead with your question or contribution. I have some issue. Please, if you are ready, kindly go ahead with your contribution or question.
It's okay, maybe you can. Okay, so Susan has.
So I respond to I just see a contribution from Susan, and then she writes, my understanding of STP is not a project. It is more or less a strategy for effective, efficient, and sustainability. Its principles must therefore be cross-cutting. And
it's okay, can we
all right, so let me take a reflection from Eunice, and then we'll continue with the next set of questions.
All right, so maybe to the question of the difference between shift the power and the decolonizing, I think that to an extent they share some similarities, right? So the similarity is that people take ownership for their own developments, right? So you know that there's a respect of people's rights to decision making, endorsement of that. So if you look at decolonization, that is the concept that knowledge is not only owned by some people and others, have to learn. The other is that decisions do not have to be made by post-colonial masters because of power, that people should make those decisions. So those are the similarities. But the difference is, I think, both in the concept and also the practice. So decolonizing actually would focus on, it's almost like a neo-colonial thinking and practice that seeks to challenge racism, that challenge the holding on to former colonial power manifestation and etc. But shift the power in a way also targets funders in the North. But that will be a limited use of shift the power, because there are other audiences of shift the power if we look at it in terms of it being a practice. So you would be interested in how Star Ghana Foundation, which is not, a northern-based organization, relates with partners and communities. And that is what you do in Shift the Power, but not in decolonizing. In decolonizing, maybe your interest would be how, for example, the US relates with citizens within and outside of the US around development priorities and etc. So those may be the conceptual differences between Shift the Power and decolonizing. Is there any other question?
Okay, so there's a question around how do we align CSO donor priorities to the community needs? And that's here's what comes with the donor price. How do we do that in alignment to the community needs? Maybe we take that and then we can take that from inside.
Yeah. I think maybe this is where we need to open up and ask about how do we do planning? How do we develop, our project interventions? Do we make enough room for maybe starting with something on the paper and going to build it all up with the communities, rather than building it all up and going into the communities to implement, right? And then only account to whoever is funding you. Sometimes I find it useful to have like a broad frame. Others will say, don't have any frame, begin with conversation and build a frame around the conversation. Because our interventions have to be situated in something. But if you go with a broad frame, then it would also be like you are guiding communities towards the areas we have identified in the broad frame. So I think it's all about the strategy of a planning and how much room we create for consultations to understand the perspectives from the perspective of the perspectives from the lens of the communities. But even more importantly, how do we do true partnership? So you are not going to implement in the community, but you are working with an organization, a group in the community who are already known, who are already embedded, and so that they can take on all of these activities. And how do you, in the lifespan of implementation, keep close relationship contacts with the communities? I'm asking, how do you make the communities the ones you account to as a priority rather than the one who is funding you. So for example, when we do our reports, the reports, most of us do not share the report with the communities. We don't even write the report with the communities in the first place. So we generate a lot of reports that only our donors and us have access to, you know. But if we can begin to do smaller things, if we are truly working with the communities, then when we are doing the monitoring, it is with the community. So what is happening, what is changing, the communities are aware. When we collate them, the communities, we share with the communities, we create room to discuss with the communities. And I think because of the way we have planned in development work that has not built in all of this, community accountability, community participation have become more of, like, in terms of planning and monetary evaluation, it's become more of, you know, a farce than a reality.
All right, so thank you very much, Eunice. Let me conclude with the submission or contribution that Susan had made, which I just lost. So it's my understanding of STP is not a project; it is more or less a strategy for effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. Its principles must therefore be cross-cutting and can apply in any intervention at the community level. Align the principles with any donor priority can work since STP is a means to achieving results. I have a very interesting question here that talks about in what ways can shifting the power empower communities to play a more active role. And interestingly, we have a contribution that talks about it. Maltaba had said that they currently work with Star Ghana on the Abbott project. And one thing they have done with the community is to have these assessments before commencing work with them. And so it's a way of getting the communities involved. If they are defining what they need, it's a way of getting them involved, and then they can also define what the shift and power work does. I have one contribution that says that we are doing a very good work, interesting conversation. But again, how do we extend this conversation to the MMDAs that we work with so they don't feel disempowered? So very good contributions, very good questions as well. I would want to take the last set because we want to close at 12. So
no, maybe you should go back to the emerging issues.
Yes. So just to go back to the emerging issues, I feel we are not touching on some of the things that have been mentioned from the survey. So my last set of questions should be or would be on the emerging issues that we arrived at when we did the survey. So just to go back to it again, then I'll take the last couple of comments about that. Okay, so the issue about how we get people participating in related activities, how do we ensure accountability, how do we make sure we rally around communities? I see a couple of questions around that. How do we get a long-term commitment of partners? I have not heard comments or commentary around that. And then there are actual recommendations that we earlier. So let me take the last set of questions basically on these emerging issues. So I think we can get some points to move forward beyond this survey. So if you are ready, let me take the last 3 or something there are, and we respond to them, then we'll come out with some few next steps. Then we can engage further on for the next steps. So who else wants to touch on the emerging issue? Participation of people in related activity, ensuring accountability, rally around. Okay. So if I can hear people come on beyond the ones that have typed, if you want to talk, please feel free, and then raise your hand and then talk. So I see. Okay. I think the hands I've seen so far. Okay, so I have seen Susan's hand up. And so Susan, beyond your submission, which I have read, did you want to make some submission again. So Susan, please, if you are ready, please go ahead.
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, so
hello, Frank.
Yeah, okay, at the point we lost you, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the communication gap. So I'm David from Youth Rise International in the Central Region. These are very wonderful conversations, and what my experience of working at the grassroots level as a youth-led organization, we want to share some few thoughts around 4 P's. The first P that if you want to shift that power, you need to consider is perception. Working in the community for close to 20 years in the development space, there's this perception that usually when you go to a community, the community have about CSOs. They think that we have, if you permit to say in the local language, like there's perception that some white people are sitting somewhere who give money to NGOs. And so when you come to a community, they assume that you have answer to all their problems. That is definitely a wrong perception. So for us to shift that power to get a community involved, we need to work systematically to really change that perception in the community that CSO get money from somewhere, and then once they come to a community, the community sit back and then the CSO provide all the solution. The second thing the second P is promise. We live a political regime where without not sounding political, but in the sense of in the context of discourse, politicians go out there to their constituencies and the street and make all kind of promises. So some way, somehow, the community is also used to people promising them, and they look forward to you coming there to promise them things and expect that you do them. And so then that means that they are supposed to be more passive. Somebody has not can make promises, but come and fulfill them or not. And that is it. That also needs to be worked on. The third P is practice. Within the NGO space ourselves, some way, somehow, I think we create the impression that we are going to solve the problems of the community, which is not really the case. So we also need to change. I like how Eunice started by saying that shift the past just in the way of thinking and the way of working. So the practice has to look at the working part of how we work as CSOs. Can we shift the power in our own internal capacity by coming to a realization that we can't develop the communities. It's a co-creation, co-design, co-implementation approach. So that there's a need for us to shift the power within ourselves CSO in terms of how we practice development, in terms of project design, implementation, and then the monitoring evaluation. And the last P I'll talk about is the power, which has to do with the donor community. So instead of a project being designed in a particular way, in a very rigid, short-term manner, it is time for them to also give out power to CSOs at a grassroots level to really work with the community to decide what they really want, what they really need, and how projects should be co-created and co-designed, co-implemented, and even co-evaluated. And that should form the basis of any partnership with the donor community. I think if we reflect on these 4 P's of perception, promise, practice, and power, targeting different stakeholders, you should be able to make quite significant impact in the Shift the Power movement. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much, David. Let me have the last question if we have. It would be interesting for me to hear something about the long-term commitments of funders and how we can collaborate to influence funders to do that. It is not limited to that, but I'm just saying that if I got some information on that, it would be interesting. So, any last one if you have? I see Dr. Bengopra's hand, and so let me take Dr. Okra, then I think we can end the questions and have some few wrap-ups. So, Doc, please, if you are on, kindly make your submission. Dr. Bengopra's.
Hello, Mr. Frank. I'm sorry, but thank you so much, Frank, and also Eunice for everything. I wanted to make some contribution earlier on, but I think pieces of it has been made. Eunice also came up to say quite a number of things regarding I wanted to talk about the scope. I think that you should use this gathering as one of the ways by which you gathered information regarding the Shift the Power concept And I think that you have provided a lot of amplification to this concept, and with the explanations that Eunice also provided. But just as others have said, I just want to amplify that we have to, extend the scope of the participants or contributors to this study that you did. Because like you even said from the beginning that the 200 respondent was very, very, small, not very big. We should be able to some extent, expand the scope and also do a more targeted categorization of CSOs, which would include the CBOs, the Community Development Foundations. And even as one of the contributors that mentioned, we have to also involve the district assemblies. I had that on my sheet. District assemblies, unit committees that are in the grassroots, even members of parliament. Somebody was talking about, yes, so members of parliament, because all of those people are part of the category of actors within the development space that would also contribute to this subject matter. And even talking about the community people themselves, what do they understand by this, and how would it improve their power of activism in this whole area of localizing development? So I think we are all on the same page with you, and it's a good job. Thank you so much.
So thanks very much, Doc. I'll take some quick response from Eunice, and then I come out with some few things as well. Right, really go ahead.
All right. So thank you very much. I think that the survey we did at this time was targeted just at civil society organization. And so what I hear from Dr. Okran is that we should also try and reach out to other stakeholders. And I'm also thinking that if we if we embed this approach enough as civil society organizations, then we'll be able to affect other parts of the system. So for example, if we have organizations working in the communities that are empowering citizens, that they must be active, they must engage with their duty bearers and all of that, then we would be seeing more involvement of citizens in our broader governance work. So that's what I think that we should be, we should aim at doing, that this is, spread quickly or intensified, because there are forms of it happening, intensify, so that we can affect the citizenry much more better. In terms of the sample size, you are very right. We could have reached more, especially, and we could have also used mixed methods rather than just quantitative and all of that. So I think that in subsequent surveys, we would consider to do those things. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much for this. I have a contribution here that says that thank you for the good work you have done. Once again, and then he mentions his name, I think it's Michael, and then he says that to me, shift the power is not anything new. It is what we used to refer to as bottom-up approach of development, where decisions are taken at the local level. My challenge is access to fund where the communities are poor. We will make this approach difficult. How do we make sure access to fund becomes easy for poor communities? Exactly. So thank you very much for that submission. And then we have, thank you for the presentation. We will share the presentation with you. So if there are further engagement, we would take that up. Yes. And let me also assure everybody that the questions that you asked, whether we have responded to them or not, we'll take note of all of that. If we form action points out of the questions and reflections, would we engage again the audience on what we intend to do next? Yes, go back to the last slide. I have just picked a few things. I'll just go through some things quickly. Sarah will top up with some few sentences. I'll take some remarks to close the discussion from Eunice, and then we can re-engage again. But thanks so much for the contributions and questions. They are very, 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 really much appreciated. Very salient to our discussion. So I'm just going through the things we highlighted, just to give ourselves some hope that we have engaged on all of these emerging issues. The question about how we can participate in much more related STP activities. I heard Eunice, and I think I heard some other people also mention that how do we get the movement closer to the local communities? And so if we have a movement happening or we have a group of STP practitioners, how do we not make it just a national movement, but even at the local level, people are getting closer to? What that tells me that is that can enhance the participation because people are part of discussions and then they can get better involved in all of these processes. The one about the mutual accountability, Eunice had mentioned it, I've mentioned it, and I think some other people also reiterated that point. That we being share the report we write from our work with the community at all. And so a way of possibly enhancing mutual accountability is to say that I have worked with you, I have had funding, whatever it is, whatever the reports are, should we not think about platforms that would make it very easy for us to share some of the good work we are doing with the same people who we have committed and ask them to support processes. And so reporting can be part of it, but of course there are other ways we can ensure accountability. The issue around rallying communities around, I think there was a very good point about even the needs assessment we do, or even when we start projects to the communities, how do we think that their priorities and work with? Do we dump our priorities because we are CSOs or funders, or do we work with them to ascertain what their needs are? Once we know what their needs are, I mean that we are working according to the needs that they have and not what we have as priorities being CSOs. So I have had some reflections which are bringing up some issues we can work on and everything. So the other last one again, or last two I heard from the discussion is about the global gathering that Eunice mentioned. If it's a global gathering, everybody should be involved. Beyond what we do or start attending these global gatherings, how do we even disseminate the kind of things that we discuss in these global gatherings with the communities we engage? So again, that we are thinking around the kind of things we can use to have some dissemination beyond the global gatherings. Everybody is part of the process. And I think Tango had mentioned something about we having weeping or providing thought leadership. It's very essential that in spaces like this, somebody steps up or moves the processes on. And so how do we collectively think and work on making sure that everybody is part and there's some form of leadership to move the next step in the processes forward. So I have picked up few things. Sarah on this note will also come out with some Tuesday letters. And then I would ask you to give some remarks to conclude the discussion. Sarah, over.
Okay, thank you very much, Juan. Thank you, Eunice. And thank you all for joining us this morning. And just to highlight some of the issues, Frank has mentioned a lot, but I'm trying to connect the dots. And the first thing that stands out in this discussion is the need for partnership. How do we partner our constituents? And in partnership, it has come out clearly. How do we plan? Because we've been talking about planning from the bottom, the proximates. And so how do we build partnerships such that we are planning more with our constituents, the issues are coming from them, they resonate with them, they identify with the issues, and then once it becomes topical for support and funding, they identify with it, they know it's coming from them, and then they build the synergies and support you as CSOs to implement or achieve these results. And so we need to look at moving forward with the issues that have come up. How do we involve our constituents more towards our planning? How do they become the core of the issues that we discussed or turn out? Partnership is key. And the questions that have come up, the issue of localization has come up strongly. Localizing the issue. Someone mentioned the issue of identifying, and you said that the poor community members are supported, that issues come up strongly and topical, and we don't leave them to fall within the cracks. And so localization is key to this discussion. And so in moving forward, Frank has mentioned it, Eunice has mentioned it, and it's something that I also want to reiterate in this discussion, that in shifting power, we need to inspire local ownership of the global agenda. And so building that structure of reconvening as the local chapter of the global movement to help us carry some of these issues forward. One, through discussions in varied ways, we convene, through subsequent webinars where other partners can lead and champion the discussion. The rich content that you have shared with us today. It is very important and critical. And so that's one thing that we want to move forward. The third I have picked is largely on ownership. And it has become very critical that we own the issues, we own the strategies, and then we own the processes as CSOs.
How do we own them?
Such that in owning, we ensure that the communities that we work with are those that bring out the issues topically. The issues identified with them, they understand the issues, and they know the way of addressing the issues. In all the shifts, the power discussion, one key thing that comes up is that the people that are affected by the issue also know the way that they can solve the problem. And so owning the process is very critical. And how is it is that we engage with them, they are topical in the discussion, and are part of the process right from conceptualization. The fourth point to note that we want to take forward with this discussion is the issue of accountability. And my colleagues have mentioned mutual accountability and the need to stress on social accountability as well. And so in terms of that, Eunice mentioned it strongly. Do we even report to the communities that we say we represent at the front of the society? And so accountability in itself is very important. And for us, we even want to know, I think it's something that we should carry forward for our next webinar. How do we practice accountability in STP? So some of the issues we will need to carry it out strongly. How do we just suppose compliance against shifting the path? It is very important for our work. And then one critical thing that has come up that we need to look at is how ready are we as CSO to even own the power that is being devolved to us. Eunice mentioned defined the power as the power, and Frank also reiterated that we want to redistribute the power. Power is concentrated at a particular state. How do we gather those power? And then redistribute that power lies within everybody, and we are able to acknowledge those power of our work. And so we need to, moving forward, advocate for civil society to take leadership role. How can we make civil society ready? Because from the discussion we are having, we need to really be sure that civil society in itself is ready to take that power and run with it. And so, Frank, this is to give you something else. We have done this survey towards Bogota, but then we need to do another survey to assess the readiness of civil society to take on the power that is being devolved to them and run with that power. And so these are the critical issues that has come up from this discussion that I want to add to what you have raised in terms of what do we take forward from this discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for the very salient points that you have raised. Let me not waste time again. Actually, take Frank. Okay. All right, so what we want to do.
All right, so thank you all very much. We've gone past the time. We thank all the people that have responded to the survey to share their experiences. and those who have been able to also join us. Some issues have come up. We would invite the members here to join some of the campaigns. So there was a question about how do we get funds directly to proximate organizations. It is one of the big asks of the Shift the Power movement. There's also a question of how do we connect people to the discussion. And so we would invite people to join many processes. There are a number of bilateral and philanthropic institutions that are reviewing their strategies for civil society support. We would share that information as and when we have them, so we can build a collective that is influencing from all sides to make our work more relevant, more sustainable. So thank you, everyone, and do have a good afternoon. Can we ask if you are comfortable to put on your cameras so we can take some shots of you? If you are okay, you can put on your cameras, please. So we capture the moment much more visually. No, we are done. We can't take it. We can do it. All right. Thank you. Bye. We'll wait for them to.
All right. So thank you very much. You have a very pleasant day. We'll be engaged again.
It's okay. So we just skip where they go off and then we go off. We wait for everybody to go. Muted, muted, muted.